Good afternoon, my fellow educators. It is such an honor to be here to talk to you today about process writing and this idea being integrated into our FET English Home Language classrooms. So if you're ready to join me on this journey, we're going to start here at the beginning with our introduction and agenda, and my name is Amy. Here we have the agenda for this workshop. We're going to start off with the process writing explanation. We'll talk about the different stages involved in process writing, and I'll give you a couple examples just to go off of to see how you can integrate these different stages of process writing in your classrooms. Then we'll do a background into what CAPS says about process writing, the importance of process writing, but also where it comes from and how it's used in the different writing assignments that our FETs have to do. Number 3, we're going to discuss process writing approaches for essays and transactional writing, and we're going to use the process writing to look at a discursive essay and a formal letter of complaint. Finally, we'll have a little Q&A session. I'll have a conclusion and thank you, and I'll show you the references that I've used to put this workshop together. Let's get right into it. So here we've got our process writing stages. You've all heard of these. We start off in our whole process writing process with pre-planning or what they call pre-writing sometimes. Then we move over to drafting, then we revise, edit, proofread, and finally we submit. This is called process writing because it's not the old technique of product writing. The difference between those two things is this. Product writing is sitting down, looking at a topic, just writing down anything that comes to mind, maybe checking it briefly, but then submitting it. The focus is on the product and the submission of that product and not on the production of the product itself. So with process writing, there are all these different steps, and all of these steps are so important because the focus can then be on developing the essay or transactional writing in a way that includes all of these very important steps. So I will walk you through the importance of each of these steps here on this next slide and explain each of them a little bit more carefully. So if we start at planning or the pre-writing activity, this just means that our learners are gathering information and they're going to start brainstorming what the topic is going to be about. They see the topic and they sit down and start thinking and formulating concepts that they can use in their transactional piece or essay. This is the very beginning part of our writing process. And the reason this is so important is because this sets the foundation for the entire transactional or essay. Next, learners will draft, meaning that they'll start writing down sentences, paragraphs, ideas, and eventually they'll start to write an entire first draft of their essay or transactional. Then they can go and reread that essay and revise it. They will evaluate and improve on these first drafts based on different stylistic issues, perhaps, and that gets more into the editing side of things where learners address the nitty-gritty, the grammatical and punctuation and all those things. Then there's proofreading, where learners will look at their final draft, check that everything's all right, and finally we have submission, where they can hand in their assignments. Some examples of each of these steps, we can take a look at planning, where maybe our FETs could do some research. If they're writing a literature essay, for example, they could go through their novels and look for quotes that they might use. They could look through their themes that might be relevant. Otherwise, if, say, they're doing a argumentative essay where they would like to find statistics, they can go and do Google searches, things like that. Then there's the creation of mind maps, storyboards, if they're doing a narrative essay. Then there's the more collaborative approach, the more learner-centered approach, where learners can sit together and have class discussions, debates. They can bounce their ideas off of one another verbally, which I find is very helpful and encourages the learners to take ownership of their own ideas and advocate for themselves, which improves the quality of writing as we go along. Finally, a great way to do some planning as a collaborative classroom idea is to incorporate some of the technology that we have available to us as teachers these days. So, programs like Mentimeter are fantastic, where if you want to plan an essay together as a class, you put up a Mentimeter with this prompt, and learners can start sending in their keywords so that they come up on the board and they can inspire one another in real time, without creating too much of a noise in the classroom. Not that noise is a negative thing, but if that's something you'd like to maybe avoid and have a more focused and quiet planning time, then Mentimeter is an exciting opportunity there. Or if you are doing distance learning, that's helpful as well. If you don't have the luxury of an in-person classroom, distance learning is still very much possible and can be very collaborative with programs such as Mentimeter. Then, when we move on to drafting and expanding on the main ideas, it's important that learners establish their tone and style to fit the topic and the audience according to our CAPS document. Then, when they revise their first drafts, they're going to want to take a look at the content, their word choices, and they want to eliminate redundancy and things that aren't working well or coherently in their essays. Then they edit, they're looking again for the grammar, spelling, and punctuation errors. This is also something that they can do collaboratively if they maybe pass their transactional to the right, or each learner writes their transactional anonymously, and then other learners can pick up from where others left off, and it can all be very fun and collaborative in lots of different ways. Then for proofreading, for the final submission, this I've written here in red that peer feedback or discussion is encouraged, are encouraged during each of these steps, which just means that at any point, learners are encouraged to stop and ask a peer for feedback, ask the teacher for advice, and everything can be very collaborative within the classroom setting. Of course, it's different when there's formal assessment, but this evaluation of one another's work is just practice to evaluate one's own work and figure out how to be more critical of the work that we do, not only for ourselves but for others, in order to create a healthy working environment. In general, it's just a great way to practice some of the life skills that are enshrined within our education system. But I digress. Here we have some CAPS guidelines about um, process writing. And what I found really helpful is this quote from the CAPS document as follows: learners must think of audience and purpose during the writing process. And sometimes we don't do this enough. It goes on to say that this will enable them to communicate and express their thoughts in a natural way, which isn't only important for actual writing in the classroom, but is so central to living outside of the classroom and being a citizen in the world. For example, the teaching of writing does not focus on the product only, but focuses on the purpose and process of writing. This is where process writing comes from in the CAPS document. And during process writing, learners are taught how to generate ideas, to think about the purpose and audience, to write drafts, edit their work, present a written product that communicates their thoughts. I think that's beautiful, and I think that's the whole purpose of learning language and learning communication at school. The idea that learners are training themselves and one another to communicate their own thoughts respectfully and mindfully and in a way that's very effective. So when we're looking at process writing, we're encouraging all of this thought about what they're thinking and writing instead of just dwelling on the actual product, the writing itself, the end result. It's to use a bit of a cliche, it's not only about the destination, it's about the journey. So when we're looking at essays in particular, in the FET phase, learners need to write narrative, descriptive, argumentative, discursive, reflective, and literature essays on various topics, as you all know. For the different lengths of essays, for a literature essay, grades 10, 11 and 12, they all need to be writing literature essays. For poetry, they're still writing much shorter essays in grade 10, but in grade 12 we're looking at 250 to 300 words. And for novels and dramas, we're looking at 400 to 450 words for a literature essay. Whereas with narrative, descriptive, reflective, argumentative, and discursive essays, these word limits are on the upper end from grade 10 through to grade 12. So it's just when we have poetry essays that they're a little bit shorter, just because poetry essays are a little bit more complex in their analytical nature. But this is the general breakdown that the CAPS document has for essay writing, and it's important that these essays are presented on a wide range of topics, and that the learners practice writing on things that are relevant, especially to them. This is the same for transactional writing, where we want these transactionals to be relevant. An argument that they make in the CAPS document is that writing letters is still relevant, even though we've shifted to email and texting, as long as the topics of the transactional texts are still relevant to the modern citizens that we have in our classrooms today. So it says in our document that in the FET phase, learners are writing formal letters, friendly letters, agendas, minutes for meetings, speeches, dialogues, interviews, columns, etc. They are obituaries and all sorts of things. So in general, when we're looking at the content for grades 10 to 12 in transactional writing, it's 180 to 200 words. What that means is that it doesn't include the address or the formatting or any of that. It's just the actual content that the learners are writing. That's 180 to 200 words. When we teach these different writings in our classrooms, using the process writing techniques, we want to make sure that we are taking a look at all of the different steps and implementing them in a collaborative way in the classroom. So I'm going to take a look at a discursive essay today to maybe show you how you can implement some of the process writing techniques in your classroom. So the discursive essay, as you will know from the CAPS document, is a more balanced argument on a topic that addresses both sides of an argument, but at the end, a writer can often choose to go for one side. So it's very balanced, very objective, but there can be a concluding remark that chooses one side at the end. The topic example that I've come up with today is, should cursive classes be replaced with South African Sign Language in the foundation phase? I'm sure many of you may remember learning cursive in grade 1, 2, or 3, and it may have been very challenging. And I wonder today how many of us still write in cursive or found that very useful. And of course, there can be arguments on both sides. Cursive is useful because it helps you with your fine motor skills, and that's a useful skill in foundation phase. And people need to learn how to read cursive because some people still write in cursive, and it's a useful creative problem solving skill. But of course, if not a lot of people write in cursive, is it still relevant? And is it more relevant than South Africa's newest official language? I don't know. It's something that you can discuss in your classrooms. So, when teaching a discursive essay, and we take a look at each of these steps from the process writing techniques, we have planning, where you can split your class into pairs or groups where they can discuss and brainstorm this idea. They can have little debates. When they draft, each group member might write one paragraph that's discussing a specific aspect of what they've planned together. Then they can go back and revise. They can revise one another's work. They can revise their own work. They can share amongst groups, have discussions and further debates, and refine to make sure that their paragraphs are cohesive with one another, so that they have a fluent style and voice, and that the content all makes sense together. Then with editing, they can check one another's grammar, spelling, and punctuation. They can go through that final proofread, and they can even give it to you as the educator to check out everything and give them some final feedback. And then they can submit. And the submission, if it's for marks, can be to you, but can also be in the form of an essay read to the class. It can be transferred into a speech that's made in the future. It can even be in the form of a debate that's done in front of the class. So there are lots of different ways that you can submit. It's not necessarily handing it in and getting it marked in the usual ways, because that's not always the most conducive way to learn stuff. Um, as you know, as educators as well, you don't necessarily have time to mark 50 discursive essays. So getting it done like this and having the learners give each other critique and advice is a really helpful way to save yourself some time, but also allow your learners to practice these skills. Then if we move on to a formal letter of complaint, this is always a fun one to mark, because the learners are always very creative when they're doing this kind of transactional. According to our CAPS document, again, writing formal letters still remains important and is a part of everyday life. And what they've said here in the document, which is quite lovely, is that the learners are encouraged to send these letters, actually really for real, with a stamp or perhaps by email. Um, because a lot of the time, if it's done well, these learners will receive a response, and that is so gratifying to know that you've done something and somebody has listened. Um, but the example that I've come up with here is write a formal letter of complaint to your local radio or television station for only broadcasting men's sports commentary and no women's content. Controversial topic, but again, it's one that your class can argue, and with feminism on the rise, it's one that will be quite a lively conversation. So, when you teach this in terms of the process writing, you have your planning where perhaps you can encourage your class to have a moment where they share their personal experiences and they can write down notes about what one another say about the experience they have of never really seeing women's sport around in media, and perhaps they hear a lot about the Rugby World Cup but didn't see anything about netball, and we could have these comparisons and debates in the class, and it's a fun way to plan in an interactive manner. Then again, in groups or individually, they could create and structure a first draft, share drafts with one another, get feedback and criticism, improve on that criticism, correct their grammar, spelling, punctuation in the editing phase, then go ahead and proofread their final draft. And in form of submission, of course, as the document encourages, they can send this letter off to a television or radio station and await a response. It would be so exciting to see if these responses come back. And then they can go ahead and critique the formal letter that returns from the people and say, like, hey, this wasn't written with this grammatical perfection, or it didn't have this perfect structure. It's always so interesting to see that um, even though we're taught how to write formally in school, oftentimes outside of school, people don't write very formally back to you. So it's just a really engaging activity that your learners might enjoy. Of course, some benefits and challenges that we might face for process writing. Benefits are that it yields high quality writing, learners can always grow and get feedback from one another, and there's opportunity for great collaboration and engagement in the classroom. There's a more conscious and calculated action that goes into writing when you do the process writing techniques, because there's more thinking that goes into it than just the product writing. And this is a more realistic way of writing. When we write in real life, this is how we do it. We think about things, we plan and we draft and we go back and edit and proofread and all of these things, because that's how we are taught to do anything really. Um, we check ourselves and we fix ourselves and we improve, and it's a really great model of success for our learners. Finally, it's exercising complex evaluation skills, which are skills that are lacking in some of our learners, and we're hoping to help them develop them further. Here we have the challenges. It can be more time consuming. There are a lot more steps, so there's a lot to think about, and it can mean that your learners are spending more time in class, but this is time very well spent, and you will see it reflected in the quality of the writing that you receive from your learners. And finally, it's monitoring and calculating progress. It can be a little bit more challenging as the educator when you can't necessarily see what all of your learners are doing at once by just receiving a pack of products, product writing. Um, but you'll find that going through the class and listening to how your learners are engaging with one another will give you great insight into how they're progressing. And when you see that their writing has improved, you'll know exactly why. To conclude, I really hope you try these process writing techniques in your classroom. I want to ask you openly, and I would love to hear your insights. Do you all think that process writing should replace product writing completely in our classrooms? What are some challenges you faced while doing writing activities with your learners? And what can we do as educators to integrate process writing techniques to our classrooms? Thank you so much for everything and for being here. I hope you continue on this journey and share what you've learned about process writing with your classes. And here are the references I've used in this workshop today. Go well and goodbye.